There are moments in every person's life when they face intense adversity. They're crucibles that forge who they become as individuals and as leaders. Now more than ever, we need leaders who are called to a higher standard, focused on leaving it better than they found it, and paying it forward to the next generations. Now, let's join Fire Chief Randy Brugman as he speaks with leaders from all walks of life, as he explores and learns from their personal journeys and the crucibles that have forged them into better leaders and better people.
Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Today it's an honor to have Richard Meraz join me on the show. Richard joined the Los Angeles Police Department in 1964, where he served 43 years, retiring in 2007. He spent 12 years as a commanding officer, rank of captain, and was assigned to several area commands. As a lieutenant, he was assigned to the Foothills Division for 2 months after the Rodney King incident to restore officer morale, gain community trust, and assist in coordinating the FBI and Christopher Commission probe of the department. He was the recipient of the Valley Bureau Officer of the Year and Department Meritorious Service Award for his efforts with the officers in the community in Foothill Division. As a sergeant and supervisory detective, he was assigned to the Anti-Terrorist Division for 18 years, during which he coordinated counter-terrorist investigations on a local and national level in conjunction with law enforcement agencies on a county, state, and federal level. During that time, he was also involved in 5 years of planning for the 1984 Summer Olympics. He is currently a facilitator for the California Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training, Sherman Block Supervisory Training Institute, and a facilitator at the Simon Wiesenthal Museum of Tolerance, Tools for Tolerance for Law Enforcement. He is a recipient of the California Narcotic Officer Association Judge John J. Jack Ryan Award for Educator of the Year for his 13 years of the Rampart Dialogue training to law enforcement officers throughout the state of California. Well, Richard, welcome to another episode of the Leadership Crucible podcast. Pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Richard, tell us a little bit about your path that led you into law enforcement, and give us a brief overview of the positions that you've held during your time of service.
Oh, well, I go way back when I was about probably 6-7 years old, and exciting program started on TV called Dragnet. And looking at that program, boy, one thing that stood out to me is I had a cousin by the name of Dick Dominguez, who was a LAPD detective, and he was right out of that program. Looking at Jack Webb and all that stuff, I immediately thought of him. He was a kind of a trailblazer for my family. His side of the family, which is my dad's side, all law enforcement and fire department, probably about 30 of us. Whereas on my mom's side, it was the gangster side. But I used to remember looking at that program, and the most impacting for me was my father. Whenever he would talk about my cousin Dick, he would light up. He would say, you know, my nephew's on LAPD, and just the way he presented that. Over time, I never really thought about being a police officer. A tragedy for me was my senior year in high school. My father committed suicide, totally unexpected. To come out of that, and now being close to 18 and now 19, I started to realize I knew exactly the career I wanted, and that was to be a law enforcement officer. And I felt that if I could be a cop on LAPD, my dad would talk about me the same way. Yeah. And that kind of set the tone for me. I took the exam earliest as I could. I was 20 years and a half. Talked to my mom. She was all for it. Passed too soon a little bit. I had to wait actually for the next class 3 months. Was good to go, and joined LAPD, and whole different department back then, just a whole different city. Yeah. If you drive into LA, you see all those skyline buildings. When I was in the academy, none of them were there. City Hall was the tallest building. 3 years out of high school, I was making $604 a month. Never made so much money in all my life. Called my buddies from high school. I said, I am making $7,000 a year. And they went nuts. They said, you're rich. What are you doing? I said, I'm an LAPD cop. Joined the department. Went to the academy, was married, had a 1-month-old daughter. Worked undercover narcotics immediately. Most of my career has been specialized units. I experienced the Watts riots in 1965, worldwide riots in LA. The city, part of the city burned. I also experienced the 1996 riots, by the way, with Rodney King and the trials in Foothill. I was one of the few in the department back then when they said, where were you assigned during the riots? I could say which one. But my career blossomed from there. I worked patrol for about a year and a half after that. I got into the vice unit at my 2nd division. Did that for 2 years. With 4 years on, I now have 3 children, but my marriage is falling apart. I'm a workaholic. I love law enforcement. A big downside for a lot in our profession. With 4 years on, I got wind that a special division was being formed called Intelligence Special. I threw my hat in the ring. I got picked. There was 8 of us to start. We were the group that would eventually start to investigate groups that later became known as the Black Panther Party, the Symbionese Liberation Army, the Brown Berets. 5 years on the job, I made sergeant. Got ready to go to patrol. But in the midst of that, my partner and I were investigating 18 bombings in the city of LA by the Chicano Liberation Front. People forget about this era. My captain called me in. He told me he wanted me to stay to continue with those investigations. I wanted to stay, and I remained. I got the stripes, but I was never a field sergeant. That would come back to haunt me later on as a captain, that lack of experience. But with 9 years on, I promoted to what's called Detective 3. It's the rank of a patrol lieutenant. Supervisor, had my own unit. And as a Detective 3 on LAPD, I did that for the next 18 years of my career. We eventually became the Anti-Terrorist Division. I got involved in the 84 Olympic planning in 1979. When the Olympics ended, I was already divorced. I almost quit. I vested a pension. I had 20 years right on the button. I retired for 40% of my salary for the rest of my life. Chief Gates at the time asked me to stay. He said, promote, make lieutenant. You've been a D3 long enough. Took him up on it, studied. Every 2 years there's a test. Took me 3 tries. And in May of 1991, I promoted to lieutenant. Put on the uniform for the first time in over 22 years. Over my head, scared to death. Came out of a hole, so to speak. Whole department had changed. Technology and all that stuff. 2 months before my promotion to lieutenant, the Rodney King incident occurred in Foothill. Gates called me in his office, congratulated me, gave me the badge he wore when he was a lieutenant, and guess where he sent me? Foothill. More over my head, more scared. That video was showing over and over again. FBI, Christopher Commission, all over the command. Became a night watch lieutenant. I learned quick. I had great sergeants to help me. I think I was humble enough, which is part of my leadership philosophy, to be able to say, you know what, I don't know. I need your help. We're going to do it the right way. And I think they respected me for that. Studied for captain. And I made captain on LAPD in August of 1995, right out of Foothill. And I was going to be assigned Rampart, one of the most violent, one of the most intense, one of the highest profile commands, not only in LAPD, but in the nation as far as we were concerned. And at home, I had a 1-month-old, a 13-month-old, a 3-year-old, and started my commanding officer career at that point. And spent 3 years at Rampart, one of the most tremendous commands, which is really the story that I talk about leadership. The Rampart Scandal has been called one of the biggest scandals in the history of the law enforcement. LAPD was there and went through that, came through it, dealt with failure, and was able to end my career after 43 years as a Captain 3 on LAPD. And that's my career in a nutshell.
Well, it's a phenomenal career, and we want to delve into a little bit about specifically the Rampart, because I know that you've been teaching for many, many years about the experience that you had there and the lessons that you learned. Could you tell us a little bit about the background and the story that came out of that?
Every LAPD division had a what was called CRASH, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. And as I mentioned earlier, the majority, I'd say 80% of the crime that was happening, particularly in that whole part of the city, not only Rampart Division, but the surrounding divisions, we had a total of 18 of them. 80% of the crime was gang related.
Yeah.
Cocaine era, the hip hop era. So everyone had a CRASH unit. CRASH was created by Daryl Gates in the mid 1980s to deal with the escalating violence of gang crime. At Rampart, I had one of the largest, one of the most impactful, and one of the most tactically sound units. I was a new captain. I was learning how to manage time. I was a terrible time manager, which you have to be a good time manager to be a good leader. And I was chasing my tail. It was just crime was off the chart, as I said before. So one of the biggest mistakes I made is I didn't pay enough attention to them. I took them for granted. They were the cream of the crop. They were handpicked. They didn't need my attention. Lesson learned, never ever take for granted the responsibility as a leader to pay attention to your people as closely as possible. Had a huge command, over 500 officers, large patrol responsibility that I had to face. About 96 probationers at the time, just in Rampart, with training officers. So much of my attention was focused on the operational patrol side. As a result, my gang unit, and a handful only, started to go sideways on us in terms of the violence they were experiencing, the frustration, the demand. One of the things that I preach is that corruption doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens incrementally. The frog in the boiling pot of water is a perfect example of that. It happens incrementally, and then it blows up, and everybody says, how in the hell did that happen? How do we not see it coming? And so my CRASH unit, eventually a handful, as I said before, went sideways on us to the point where it started with excessive use of force, falsification of reports, putting cases on people, taking the shot callers and the violent criminals off the street, retaliating against particularly 18th Street and Mara Salvatrucha. For example, when the mom was killed in her living room, the mindset was, who called that shot? We're going to get that individual off the street, and we're going to do it now. We're going to put a case on them, things of that nature. And from there, it escalated into throwdowns, holding back evidence, small guns, narcotics, particularly two individuals, Rafael Perez and Nino Durden. There's a movie that's called Training Day with Denzel Washington that allegedly portrays them. It's Hollywood. It's way out in left field. But those two individually and a periphery of a handful of officers took things into their own hands, crossed the line. It led to shootings that were set up or changed during the course of the investigations. Checking out narcotics from a property division. We had terrible checks and balances back then. Eventually getting into to use it for throwdowns for a more enhanced penalty, and then sale of those drugs and shootings, as I said before. And after about 3 years, one of those officers, Rafael Perez, crossed the line, made a mistake. But for that mistake, maybe we never would have caught up with them. We took him down. That blew up. That started the Rampart Scandal. It was only disgraced officer Rafael Perez. He had a 4-month jury. 4 months later, he had a jury trial. It was a hung jury, and then about a year after that, he was going to go down big time. He decided he wanted to roll over and tell the truth. He implicated himself, his partner, and several others. That was September of 1999. That blew up, and that became the Rampart Scandal.
The Rampart Scandal has been described as one of the most debilitating police corruption scandals in the history of the LAPD. Is that correct?
Yes. 76 officers were swept up as a result. We have what's called a Board of Rights. It's called a tribunal. Three sit in judgment. We're one of the few agencies in the nation that have that. Chief of Police of LAPD cannot just calling an officer and arbitrarily fire him or her. They have to go through the whole Board of Right process. It's an informal trial. Witnesses are called. Questions are asked. Objections can be made. Guilt or innocence is based on what we call the preponderance of evidence. If an officer is found not guilty, chief can't change that verdict. It's over. If the officer is found guilty, and it could be multiple charges, a penalty phase is brought in. It depends on the severity of the charge, the tenure of the officer, the complaint history of the officer. A recommendation can be made anywhere from a suspension of a few days to a major suspension to termination. That goes to the chief. The chief can lower the penalty. He can't raise it. The officer is subsequently either fired, suspended, or otherwise. As I said, 76 officers were swept up. There were 58 boards of rights. Of those 58, 34 were found not guilty. 24 were found guilty. Of those 24, 7 resigned in lieu of. During the process, they knew they were going to get fired. They were going to lose their pension. 5 were flat out fired. 12 were suspended, allowed to come back. I personally was sent to a board after my involvement, not because of crash, but other incidents that occurred. I was given a 20-day suspension. That suspension was described by the LA Times back then as the biggest suspension of an LAPD command officer in over 50 years. And quite frankly, it's then I learned to differentiate the difference between physical pain and emotional pain.
Yeah.
Physical pain, you take some Motrin, you heat it, you ice it, you elevate it. Hopefully it goes away after a few days or months. Emotional pain, from my perspective, hurts just as much or worse. To be honest with you, I still deal with the emotional pain of Rampart. This telling my story, so to speak, for the last 10 years across the country is therapeutic for me. I handle it a little bit better. Yeah. But I learned how to deal with that emotional pain. I learned that it's a self-healing process. It's an inside-out process. Yeah. Looking at yourself in the mirror and asking yourself, who are you? What do you stand for? Where do you go from here? And I was able to deal with that. I almost quit. I came back as a result of that. When I became a captain in another division, actually about maybe 4 years later, when the boards of rights started, many of those officers who were suspended or found not guilty came back and worked with me at Northeast Division. And we were able to, as a result of the lessons learned from Rampart, put some pretty good police work back together again. But it's called one of the biggest scandals in the history of LAPD. A big sweep of a large part of, as I said before, Rampart officers were swept up. Let me qualify one thing by saying this. Number one, I sat in over 150 boards of rights. And this time I was on the other side. I know what that feels like. And I know how to deal with that now. I think going through that experience and that failure made me a better leader. So that when these officers came back, they looked me up, said, you know what we've been through. And I welcomed them back. I wanted all of them. And I think I was able to heal them and turn them around. And so there's a whole lesson learned in terms of failure and how to deal with failure with dignity and respect versus being the biggest victim anybody ever wanted to see. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is that the lessons learned as a result of that tremendous failure and what I was able to create for myself in leadership, I think is something that has really held me together. And I live that credo to this day.
Well, and I think as we talked previously, I think in retrospect, you always look back, and I found this true in my own life and leadership lessons, is you look back and say, I wish I would have seen that. I wish I would have done that. differently or reacted to that differently. And I think the lessons that you've taken away from that experience are very valuable. And one is that sometimes you do have failure and you have to overcome it. But are there any others that really jump out at you that you can say, you know, other lessons that I've learned from that experience were this?
Well, there's obviously very, very, there's a lot of lessons. I think the biggest thing that I did when Rampart blew up, I was the first and the loudest to say, how in the hell did that happen? How did I not see it coming? I can't tell you how many sergeants came into my office. Rafael Perez and Nino Duran, they were my two best cops. They were my go-to guys. I thought, you know, how did I not see it coming? Sergeants would ask me, where did I go wrong, Cap? All I could tell them back then was, welcome to the club, so to speak. I have thought long and hard about Rampart. I have a whole different perspective today. One of my warning shots that I throw out when I start my talks is that corruption doesn't happen in a vacuum. Yeah. People don't wake up one day and go into what I call the dark side. It happens incrementally. The frog in the boiling pot of water. You slowly but incrementally raise the heat. We become inured to that heat. That heat becomes white noise to us. And we eventually boil to death. And as we're boiling to death, we're muttering, how in the hell did that happen? Yeah. How did we not see it coming? And I think part of leadership is where do we go from here? And one of the things I was able to establish for myself after they moved me from Rampart, they told me back then that it wasn't punitive. I needed a change. It was before my board. I went to Central Division, and I did some soul searching with 3 peers who helped me put something together. I said, how do you do it? What can I learn from this? And I think one of the biggest things I did for my life back then was I established a Credo. I think every leader should have a Credo. What do I stand for? Where do I go from here? And very quickly, mine's in 3 parts. It's a better place. From that day forward, taking over Central and every command I had thereafter, I would make it a point every chance I got, meetings, supervisors' meetings, the hood of a police car, I would say, I don't know how long I'm going to be with you. It may be 6 months, it may be a year, but if and when I leave, if this is not a better place because of me, I failed you and I failed myself. Quality, everything that you touch, you leave your legacy. You leave it better than you found it. And you have to believe in the power of one. And I will lament many times that I wish I could go back to Rampart. I'll get emotional about it. To this day, when I say I wish I could go back to Rampart, it's not to go to the dark side. It's not to go, because even when you're amongst it, you don't realize you're amongst it. It's to go back and revisit every discretionary moment, 3 years worth, that I kissed off, that I looked the other way. It's no big deal. It's not going to sink the ship. I've got bigger fish to fry. It's not my responsibility. Worse, I want to win the popularity contest. To go back and revisit that, I will lament that time and time again. So to leave it a better place and believe that being the role model and exhibiting those virtues will drive it to all levels, to lieutenants, to captains, to cops in the street, to create that type of environment. My second credo is Pygmalion, that people will rise to your level of expectation, and it has to be inside out. I came so close to quitting when I took my 20-day suspension. I thought I was done. My career was over. I knew that I was still a captain, but I knew that I would never promote beyond what's called a Captain 1. And it took me about 4 days to kind of slap myself and realize, no, I still have a command. I can still have cops come into my office and say, I need your help, Captain. So people will rise to your level of expectation. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have to believe that. We can set goals too high. We can never set standards too high. But it has to be, everything has to start inside out. So I realized I had to rise to my level of expectation and be Pygmalion from that standpoint. And eventually that became my credo. That if you lower standards, trust me, that will be your self-fulfilling prophecy. People will lower themselves to that level of expectation. So I started with myself, set standards, held people to that standard. It was contagious. It was infectious. I drove it to all ranks in terms of Pygmalion. And when officers came finally to see me, I wore a Class A uniform 80% of the rest of my career. I walked into the front door of every command meeting. If people didn't want to sit next to me because they don't want to be associated with me, I had no control over that. I could understand it. So in terms of holding your head up high and dealing with failure with dignity and respect, I learned to pass that forward, I guess, to people that came to me afterwards. And I told them, you're going to wear a uniform. You're going to get back in a black and white. We're going to decide when that's going to be. And we're going to overcome this together. So Pygmalion theory of leadership is another philosophy. I live all this to this day, by the way. Anywhere I go, anything I do, I try to leave it in a better place. Even though I'm retired, I rise to my level of expectation. I'm 81 years old. I'm in the greatest shape of my life. I'm going to live to be 100. I know I can. I don't know where I'm going to be 10 years from now when I'm 90, but I know this. I'm going to be in better shape. I'm going to be more read. I'm going to be more in love. I'm just getting started. Pygmalion theory. And then the third is servant leadership, love leadership. And that's got a lot of moving parts. You know, time doesn't allow me to get into all that stuff. But when I was at Rampart for 3 years, I cared a lot. I cared a hell of a lot. I was known as the caring captain. The mistake I made, I didn't love enough. Much of what's in it for Rich Meraz. How is this going to make me look? What are you going to think about me? Servant leadership, one of the biggest parts for me to learn from that is to take responsibility for your own self-esteem. I spent too much time depending on others to make me feel good about myself. Consequently, I wouldn't be completely good honest with them. I wouldn't tell them what they needed to hear. Wanted to win that damn popularity contest. And once you take responsibility for your own self-esteem, it's hard dogma. It's liberating because now I can tell you what you need to hear. And you may walk out of the room thinking I'm the biggest jerk in the world, but I'm telling it to you because I love you. When I say I love you in law enforcement, boy, you get a reaction. But people understand it over time.
Yeah.
And I guess some of the best leaders are leaders who love their people, but you have to love yourself. And it's and take responsibility for yourself. And once you tell people what they need to hear, you'll be surprised how often they come back and they'll say to you, thanks for telling me. You changed me. You can change somebody just 1 degree. In the long run, they'll wind up in a whole different direction. So a better place, Pygmalion theory, love leadership, which includes being vulnerable, being honest with yourself, is a credo that I established back then, and I live it today. In terms of advice, I think one of the things that we're failing and that we don't really focus in on is the whole aspect of resiliency. Particularly in law enforcement, we are facing a legitimacy crisis today that is unprecedented in law enforcement. I've been involved in law enforcement for 60 years, and I've seen the ebb and flow of the love-hate relationship between communities and law enforcement. We just can't get it together for whatever reason. But we always come out of it. One of my highest highs in best relationship with the community was after the '84 Olympics. The whole world of cops for those 2-week period. The Rodney King riots, we crashed and burned, and we're connected across the country. What happens in New York works its way to LA, and the demonstrations are the same. And it seems like since August 9th, 2014 with Ferguson, we just can't seem to come out of it. And just when we were coming out of it, May 25th, 2020 happened in Minneapolis. And the latest date I put in is January the 7th, 2023, Memphis. Cops today are demoralizing. They're disengaging. They're depolicing. They're burned out. Their mantra is, I'm not going to stick my neck out and get it chopped off for making an honest mistake. And I think the call for leadership, and I'm talking primarily law enforcement, is more challenging than ever before, where we have to be a sounding board. We have to get officers through depolicing. And I think one of the things that we fail to do is understand the whole necessity of resiliency. And again, that has to start inside out, that we have to take care of ourselves, exercise, good sleep, good nutrition. Relationships is so important. Aside from law enforcement, family, friends, connections, social connections, thriving from mistakes that we make. We are so afraid of failure, but it's one of the best things that can happen to us. One of my mantras is try, fail, learn, repeat. That has to be a mantra. We have to embrace mistakes, use humor, meditate in your own way that you're doing, visualize whatever it takes. And I think that we lack that in taking care of ourselves. And as leaders, that has to be plugged in. And that's part of servant leadership. Do I really know my people? Am I really present? Am I really visible? Am I accessible? I shared early on that I didn't pay attention to my Rampart crash unit. I learned what a tremendous mistake that was. And I changed the way I ran commands thereafter. I gave up my parking spot. Captains always park near the entrance closest to their office so you can get in and out. By the time I got to Northeast, that was my third command, and all these cops started to come back. I realized, hey, you know what? I don't need a parking spot. Give it to Officer of the Month. I picked and choose what entrance I would come in. And I would generally come in through the farthest exit or entrance to my office so that I worked my way to my office. I'd go past the kit room where we check out equipment. I'd go past the roll call room, the coffee room, I would sit, I would talk. Hell, it would take me 30 minutes sometimes to get to my office. Present, visible, accessible. That's one of my mantras of leadership as well. When I say be present, I don't mean just physically. I mean, I'm going to sit, I'm going to talk. I see you, I hear you, I feel you. To be present, to be visible, I'm everywhere. I'm everywhere. I'm knocking on your door if you're injured, if you're suspended. I'm sending you a text. We'll get through this. To be visible and then to be accessible. Here's my cell. Here's my email. That's going to open the door. People are going to call you like crazy. But I think that's a leader's job. Yeah. I ask questions many times to young leaders. Do your people come to you? If not, why not? Leaders have to ante up first. I sit and talk to you. A simple thing like, as a captain on an LAPD, you have to give discipline your officers sometimes, or cops want to come in and talk. And I used to have all these candies in my office to draw them in. Hey, can I have one of those, Cap? Sure, go grab one. It was on the farthest corner of my office, so they had to come through. And as they're running back out, I'd say, hey, let's talk for a second. What's going on? But I would get away from behind that big old desk and that laptop and have 4 chairs on the other side of my desk so that when we sit, I'm sitting next to you. And we're talking, and I'm listening to you. It takes time. It takes effort. These are part of servant leadership, part of becoming trustworthy. Trustworthy, another philosophy of mine. Trust has to be earned. You cannot demand it. And I think one of the ways that you gain it is to become trustworthy. People follow virtue. People follow virtue. And virtue makes us all leaders. The lowest ranking individual in a squad could be the true leader because he or she has the moral imperative to stand up and say what needs to be said. Willing to get their neck chopped off. We gravitate towards those people. Yeah. I think in order to affect change, people have to believe that you're after their best interest. It's not what's in it for me. It's what's in it for you. Take responsibility for your self-esteem. Believe in yourself. Understand the culture, values, beliefs, and behaviors. That drives organizations, not policy and procedure. Culture eats policy for lunch. You want true change? Yep. Know the culture. What are the values? What are the beliefs? What are the behaviors? How do I change that? To regenerate ourselves, to reinvigorate ourselves, to establish resiliency. It's not magic. Yeah. You don't just add water and stir. It's not a fancy speech you give every once in a while. It's a day in and day out mindset. Sometimes it's hour by hour. Sometimes it's minute by minute. I'll ask myself sometime, who was I with yesterday? Did I leave them in a better place? Did I really hear them, listen to them? It's challenging, but it's liberating. Yeah. And it's, I think it's the essence of leadership. And if we ever needed it today, it's now. Yep. Pygmalion, have a credo, be resilient, make your co-workers resilient. understand the values, the beliefs, the behaviors. Have your own credo that you live, that you actualize until the day you die.
Yeah.
My credo, I created it my second year, my third year as a captain, and I live it today. I will live it today, and I lived it yesterday. If you don't define yourself, people will define you themselves.
Very, very, very true. Richard, this is just really insightful and great advice, and I hope that the younger generation that's listening today can have some perspective about as they move forward in their careers. The advice that you have given us today. So thank you so much for being with us on the Leadership Crucible. We really appreciate it. Thank you for your service. I know 43 years as a police officer, that's a tough road. And you've sacrificed a lot. We appreciate all that you've done to protect the lives and property of the people of LA, but also for the leadership perspective that you're providing to other officers today and to other professions. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being on the show.
It was an honor, Randy. I really appreciate the opportunity. I love you. Thank you for what you do. This program and the impact it has is right in my value system. The impact you have on leadership, I'm sure, is indescribable. Keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you, Richard. Appreciate it, and great to see you.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Crucible podcast. If you have a story of adversity you'd like to share, we'd love to hear it. Join us next time as we continue to explore how to live lives of success and significance.